Hi everyone, George here, the editor of the Sales Transformation Podcast. This week on the show, we've got a discussion that originally aired over on the Selling Well podcast, hosted by Mark Cox. Phil joined Mark together with Mike Sparling to discuss the evolution of the sales mindsets and how they, especially the new and improved intellectual authenticity mindset, can interact with salespeople using more and more AI in their work. If you want to listen to more episodes of the Selling Well podcast, you can find a link in the show notes. In the meantime, though, please enjoy the episode.
Team, we've got an absolutely amazing show for you today because today's guest is Dr. Philip Squire. And Philip's the author of a fantastic book called Selling Transformed, Develop the Sales Values which Deliver Competitive Advantage. Philip's also the CEO and the founder of Consalia, which is the UK's only sales business school with executive master's pathways in leading sales transformation and key account transformation. Philip's work really kind of intersects with a bunch of things that really matter deeply to us. The professionalism of sales, the role of values and trust in B2B selling, and the idea that sales performance is not just about techniques or process, but actually how we show up. Originally, team, Philip's book talked about the sales values that buyers wanted to make sure that we made it to the top 10% of salespeople in the winner's circle. And when he originally wrote the book, those values were authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, impactful audacity. He actually had some research done recently in 2025. It's in the show notes today, the state of sales mindsets and how do customers want to be sold in 2025. So a great update to some of the work. And frankly, the original book, Selling Transformed, was kind of like an MBA in B2B sales. The research was so thorough. It was like the most interesting textbook you've ever written. But the reference points and the bibliography is something I continue to go back to. In today's podcast, we actually talk about a lot of the themes in Selling Transformed and the updated research, including why is it values that matter more than process or techniques? A little bit about what are the values buyers don't want to see. And we've got an AI view to most of this because today we're joined by Mike Sparling, our AI thought leader who's been joining us for the last couple of podcasts here. We really get into if something like authenticity is a value that buyers really want in their salespeople, how can we be authentic if we're leveraging AI in a significant way? There are a few excellent questions posed during the course of this interview and some great discussions amongst Philip and Mike, and I weigh in a little bit too. And if you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I did, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. Team, here's a great conversation with Dr. Philip Squire and Mike Sparling. Hey, Philip, welcome back to the show. We're so delighted to have you back on the Selling Well podcast.
It's super exciting to be back with you, Mark. I've admired what you've been doing over these years and can't wait to get stuck into this particular episode as well.
Yeah, us too. And team, we're joined again for this series of episodes by our pal, Mike Sparling. So we see Mike as our AI Sherpa in many ways, a Canadian thought leader on AI. Mike, great to have you in the podcast here again.
It's great to be here, and it's really exciting to meet a unicorn in Philip. I go back to my days as a dean in a business academic setting, and the two hardest things to find were terminal degrees in sales and terminal degrees in accounting. And so your PhD makes you a unicorn in my books.
I've never been described a unicorn before, Mike, but I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you. No, I was also interested in your sort of academic journey as well. So I'm particularly looking forward to sort of getting to sort of understand your thinking a bit more on this episode. So yeah, good to be here.
Wonderful. So back in the day, Mike, when we started the podcast, it's a few years back now. Philip was one of our original guests. And there were two reasons I knew I had to chase down Philip to get him as a podcast guest. One is his LinkedIn byline, which says, helping make sales the world's most sought after profession. So as soon as I read the book and saw the byline, I thought, boy, I've got to get Philip on the show. The second thing I absolutely loved about the book, page 1 of, and by the way, team, I'm speaking to Selling Transformed, Develop the Sales Values which deliver competitive advantage. This is one of the best sales books I have ever read. And when I prepared for today's episode, Philip, I was going back through it and all of my highlights and my notes. I still like hard copy books, so it's got dog ears all over it. But page 1, what can you expect from Selling Transformed, the book? First bullet, considers the role selling is played in the context of world history and suggests that its contribution to global economics and cultural development is both profound and unrecognized. I'm sold. As soon as I read that bullet, I'm on the team. And so Philip, let's just do a quick, summary or touch on the book just very, very briefly, because some of the original stats on the book are just so powerful. So you talk about some of this detailed research and team. The book it's both a textbook and a fantastic read. I've never come through that before. I've never seen this before. It's a textbook you literally would use to, learn the profession of sales, but it's also incredibly interesting. But there's some alarming stats in there to be sure. And some of the research spoke to 80% of buyers, senior buyers, seeing, 30%, only 30% of salespeople adding value. And in some contexts, even less than that.
Correct.
So I know we've come back to some of these stats in the updated report, but tell us a little bit about why we had to write this book and some of the challenges or issues we were seeing in professional sales back then, Philip.
Well, I suppose before the book was the doctorate. And so that's where the, kind of research was started. And it was really by chance, sort of interviewing a number of customers of our customers about how they wanted to be sold to, and sort of using these interviews to help support a big European sales kickoff event. And one of the questions that we asked was, having told us what you like and dislike about salesmanship, what percentage of salespeople sell in a way that you want? And I'll never forget the very first person I spoke to said, well, in his view, 95% of salespeople are a complete waste of time.
Tough.
And so I thought, okay, well, some people are born to, be slightly controversial. So I thought, well, I'll tell you what, it wasn't planned that I would keep this question in all the interviews, but the question was kept in, and the second person said less than 10% of salespeople sold in a way that he would want. And I think at this stage, it wasn't part of an academic research program, but it was the trigger it was a little spark that ignited what has become a sort of 20-year journey. I wasn't an academic before, Mike, but I found myself being drawn into the academic world through a suggestion made by one of the professors he met, who said, why don't you turn this research into a doctorate? So that's where it started. And it's so interesting when you look back on life, isn't it, to look at how serendipity sometimes triggers events in a way that you wouldn't normally expect. But yeah.
Well, it ends up triggering this research and the doctorate and then the book.
Yeah.
And, really in the book, one of the most provocative ideas, I think, or unique takes on it is that sales success is really not a process problem or a technique problem, but it's a values problem. What did you see or hear, and we'll get to the values, but what did you see or hear in those early days that convinced you the values, that was the area to focus on to elevate sales performance?
Yeah. I think you could possibly sort of link that back to sort of what we refer to as lead and lag indicators, in the sense that when I remember halfway through the research, and this is having interviewed sort of 80, 90 people from different roles, different parts of the world, and sort of coming together in London, working with a professor at London Business School at the time, and wanting to sort of draw conclusions as to the research findings. And we came up with flip chart pages that absolutely failed, in my view, to push the story along, because the sort of solutions to this 5-10% problem that we mentioned earlier were, you need to be good at listening, you need to have curiosity, you need to be professional in the way you present yourself, you need to have commercial acumen. And I sort of knew from my own experience that companies spend billions of dollars in this kind of training. So I wanted to know, well, okay, so if we're training people on the right sort of behavioral things, why aren't they doing it? Because clearly there's a mismatch between what organizations are striving to train their people to do better is not being experienced at the customer end. And that then is so much of the training had been orientated around sort of behavioral techniques of selling and processes and methodology of selling. And I sort of began to realize, and it was one particular professor who challenged me about what my values were from a sense of bias. Mike, you would probably resonate with this a little from your academic work, but I realized that I was looking at the data through a lens that was so influenced by what I had been taught. I wasn't opening up my mind for new ways of thinking, and the new ways of thinking were sort of related very much to sort of understanding how you do think, and this links to values. And once I started to play around with this concept, I realized that values were like the operating system of human beings, and that our behaviors and competencies and skills and what we end up doing is because of them. But no one had really defined what were the values that customers really looked for from salespeople, and what were the values that they often saw that they didn't like. So that's, once I got onto that trajectory, it became relatively quick to define what would be the core values that would lead to, in customers' views, success, and what would lead to a negative performance. So that was, I don't know, I feel as though I might be repeating what I said before, Mark, but for me that was a pivotal moment in terms of sort of what got me to where we are today, and this values-based approach to selling, which I know is close to your heart as well.
Well, I'm glad we're summarizing some of this, Philip, because, the forgetting curve is alive and well. And I think we recorded that original podcast 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
And so and 100 episodes ago for us. So, as your most recent research points to, though, that concept still resonates. We're going to talk about the 2025 research.
Yes.
But obviously the work was spot on and so important. And where I always found it interesting, when we've talked about helping sales organizations, and Mike and I have spoken about this before, I love this thought of culture, and say, I'm going to hire for culture. And the only way to create culture, is define how do we do things around here, is to lead to values. So how do we define the values that are going to create the culture? I loved this thought of saying, what are the mindsets or values that the client most wants to see in a salesperson? By the way, let's call out the ones they don't. Yeah. And you list, I'll list them both quickly. Team, just for your edification, those who haven't had a chance to pick up Selling Transformed, Chapter 4, when you lead through the history of sales training and coaching, and then get to the values that matter, it's one of the best, most concise summaries of all of the training methodologies, going back to the start with Dr. Neil Rackham in Spin Selling. That was kind of the first really major one. If you get past Dale Carnegie and all of these kinds of things,
Yeah.
such a great academic review of it. And I'm such a nerd for all of this stuff. I just love it.
Oh, great.
I didn't see in the funnel in there, but we'll give you a pass because technology, we weren't a global powerhouse yet. So I understand why we might have been absent from that method, that summary.
Next release.
Next release. Yeah. The next release of the book. So maybe let's touch on, because everybody listening is going to say, well, if I haven't read the book, what are the mindsets? The positive values or mindsets: authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, love it. And then my favorite was always tactful audacity. I get half of that right most of the time. I'll leave it up to you to decide which half I don't get. But tactful audacity as being these mindsets, maybe let's just touch on briefly before we talk about the updated view. But originally, how did we land on these 4, Philip? And, why wasn't it 6? And then maybe did 1 or 2 of them surprise you most when they made the list?
I think that, we went through so many sort of analysis of conversations and then started to group what buyers were looking for, and both positive and negative. And we began to cluster them in under different heading. And so, authenticity and trust and integrity, these words surfaced very quickly. I would say client centricity is a kind of no-brainer. Obviously customers are looking for sellers to be totally client-centric. I think what we found, what began to realize is those 2 values are the baseline for building trust, but it doesn't put you into what we call the winner's circle. And the winner's circle has rarer and more exceptional mindsets and values. And these were the proactive creativity. I think salespeople are very often very good at being reactive creatively. So a customer goes with a problem, they're very good at coming up with sort of reactive solutions to that. But proactive creativity was a very important nuance that we wanted to surface, that are rarer but important for exceptional salesmanship. But the tactful audacity is really having the emotional intelligence to push an idea hard if you really believed it to be correct, but at the same time respecting the person that you are pushing your idea, if you like, or suggesting that they should do something differently to what they've asked you to do. There's the tactful audacity, is my favorite as well, Mark, but it's hard to do. It's important to do it at different stages of the sales cycle. Is people say, when do you use these values and mindsets? Well, it's really important at the very beginning. Sometimes just getting meetings with people requires you to be tactfully audacious and proactively creative. When you have qualification, it's more about client centricity, solution development, proactive creativity. Negotiation, of course, tactful audacity again. So you've got this interplay of the mindsets. And I think what we realized was that you can't have one without the other. You can't be tactfully or have bucket loads of tactful audacity and proactive creativity without having the authenticity and client centricity, because clients need to trust you. And so I think what we've begun to realize through the analytics of the sales mindset survey, that we've got thousands now of surveys that people have done, is that less than 10% of salespeople score what we would call, say, in the winner's circle across all 4. Some may be right up there on 3 out of 4, but not all 4. And I don't know, Mike, what you think about what I've just shared, but with you on that topic. But anyway.
Well, I think it's a good question, Philip, because, Mike's a chief operating officer, chief technology officer. In addition to that time in academia, he's run large organizations and large groups. Mike, from your perspective, I guess 2 questions. Would the percentage of effective salespeople calling on you over the last, 15 or 20 years Does that resonate in terms of, the 10% or the 30%? And are those the values that you're looking for? Authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, and tactful audacity. Do those resonate with the folks that you're trying to partner with or work with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great lead in, Philip, and a great couple of questions, Mark. I've probably spent a vast amount of my career carefully building a never-ending maze of sandbags and other things to prevent salespeople from getting too close to me.
Cool.
But part of it is to really look for those mindsets that you're calling out. And in particular, I think you're very accurate that a lot of people pursue selling without fully understanding why or the direction that they're headed in. And parts of what I really loved about your background as I was researching it was the sort of notion that your mission statement is to make selling the world's most sought after profession. And
love it.
I hear that in Mark. I've often said that people that I've met through Mark or in other cases, professionally trained sales leaders or salespeople truly understand that critical intersection between the value of the firm creates and the needs that the client has. And it's a little bit of a rough way to describe it as the tip of the spear, but I do use that analogy. And I'll go back to really say that my transition from being a computer science undergraduate to being a business leader driven by technology, I credit it to people like Mark and some of the other sales leaders who I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from, because taking an understanding of what we could do as a firm and aligning it to what we want to do in order to please customers, that's a big shift for a lot of people. And so I think your mindsets really resonate, as do your percentages of who gets it well and who doesn't, and how important that is to moving to a buying point. And I'd probably say just one more piece is that, to me, I think the proactive creativity is one that really resonates as an AI practitioner, because if I decouple those two words and say, what does proactive mean? Proactive means, and credit to Mark, he and I have been talking a lot about the importance of signal reading in the professional sales space, and that being able to subtly recognize the signals that are emitted by all parties in a conversation, a negotiation, an exchange, that signal detection, I think, to me, is what proactive means. If I can recognize the signals, that's going to trigger something within me. And then creativity, from an AI standpoint, I'm not in the camp that says AI can be creative, but I think AI can synthesize across a broader set of inputs and produce rapidly broader results that we can then, as the human in the loop, finesse and improve to the offering that we make. And so figuring out the novel responses is the creative side. Identifying and detecting the signals is the proactive side. And as a partnership, we can really do a lot with AI or technology to further that piece forward and deliver proactive creativity to buyers, factual for what we intend to achieve, tuned to the signals being sent and resulting in those outcomes. And I think that's the path and I'd be curious your thoughts, the path to raising those percentages much higher. It's the people who understand in our current world, how do I synthesize this artificial piece with my core strengths and bring the how and the what and the why together to lead that tip of the spear further into the organization?
I think what's interesting, Mike, this is quite personal. I think that if you go back to the beginning of last year, when I would say, the great sort of AI wave hit everyone. And I felt it was a kind of dystopian moment in a way. You had so much was the promise of AI and, the seismic changes that we could expect as a consequence of this incredible technology that was about to sort of take over the world. That, there were moments, I felt there were moments, what is the point of being human? If you like. And and I and it's been interesting. And if I could sort of perhaps relate this also to where I am now, which is in a much and I suspect I'm similar to many people, because we've all gone through something like, we know that something's going to hit us that we don't know much about. Yeah, but we don't quite know how it's going to change the world. But we'll figure it out, and we're probably in a lot better position now. But what happened last year, I think, has had quite a profound effect on how we have started to look at the sales mindsets again, which is in part been triggered by AI. And it's often it's sometimes a word that a customer says that triggers a train of thought that you haven't thought of before. And we recently conducted a similar exercise of research across the world, asking similar questions to that I did 15 years ago for the doctorate. And buyers were using the word intellectual dishonesty as something that they don't like. And a completely different buyer used the word intellectual honesty. And I can honestly say that in all the interviews that I did 15 years ago, the word intellectual just did not surface. So that in itself is interesting, connecting the word intellectual to salesmanship. I think that's quite something. But this idea of intellectual dishonesty and intellectual honesty sort of got me thinking about the values of mindsets. And because of our academic focus, one of the skills I think we teach people who come on our master's programs is about critical reflection and sort of how you think. And so and we knew that this was one of the transformative components of our programs. And I sort of had that in the back of my mind, looking at this word intellectual and then connecting it to authenticity. And I think the nuance is subtle, but huge, actually. I mean, in that we've now added the word intellectual to authenticity. So authenticity is the integrity and the moral compass that you would have as you sort of reflect on yourself. But intellectual is a quality of thinking that customers are saying that they really appreciate in salespeople, in the way that they solve problems. And I've broken down the word intellectual into three components. One is sort of one component is integrating sources of data and the ability to integrate sources of data, synthesizing information, if you like. The other is instinct. It's sort of having an instinct about something. And the other is imagination, the word imagination, because it's interesting what you're saying earlier about artificial intelligence and creativity. And so I'm beginning to define into the intellectual part of authenticity into those three dimensions. And if you look at, and then the other neat thing, and this definitely is not a marketing gimmick, but if you have two pages of a book and you have some wet ink, and on one page you've got AI, which is and then you close the book, on the other side you have IA. And to me, the secret moving to the future is combining intellectual authenticity with the way you use artificial intelligence, because customers are expecting you to have both. Yeah. So this is where the nuances come, but I think it's been triggered, Mike. These words intellectual have been triggered by AI because knowledge is all pervasive now. There should be no excuse for salespeople not doing the research, not producing effective account plans, using, perhaps AI technology to do it. So you need it, but you need that magic something which is not AI, which is the human
Yes,
component,
the human element.
the human element. And I've sort of defined that as intellectual authenticity as
Yeah.
being a key
I
attribute.
like them.
Yeah. That was really something that I latched on to your November 25
Oh.
research. The
Oh,
research.
thank you. Yes.
The piece that you transition from authenticity through what I would call human in the loop. You
Yeah.
refer to it as the person, and then into the intellectual authenticity and the importance of that. And you could almost take, that's a much more eloquent way that you framed in that research of saying nobody wants more AI slop, right? Like one of these
Yeah,
sort of words we
correct.
hear right now about the endless wave of clearly generated, never edited, fed
Right.
with a weak prompt, and then posted on LinkedIn or social media or released in a statement to try and appear intelligent without understanding the connection between appearance and actual value creation. So I loved that research, and I wrote intellectual authenticity down in my journal and double underlined it as something to really pay careful attention to, because you are so on mark with that transition from individual authenticity through aided human in the loop to create that outcome that we're seeking in the intellectual authenticity space. So hats off and kudos on that.
It seems like such an interesting one, guys, because the research also says that authenticity is one of the most important values, but lowest scoring values for salespeople.
Mark. Yeah, and this leads on to another question, doesn't it? Which is it's around complacency. And are people relying too much on AI, to write the proposals, do the research, and and this is what buyers are kind of alluding to when they talk about intellectual dishonesty, because they can tell, they can sense when something isn't original and authentic. So my worry is that standards of sales professionalism will diminish because of AI, because I think this might be slightly controversial as well. I think salespeople are inherently lazy.
Okay, now we have our clickbait.
And then we, and people want to take shortcuts. And there's too much pressure on sort of producing results for that quality time that you need to be able to look at what the data tells you, which you absolutely need. So AI can free up the time, but you need to replace it with this instinct and, imagination and some of these other things that play in. So this is my concern. So maybe in a year or two, we could come back to the research and say, am I right or wrong? I hope I'm wrong, but this is my fear.
So folks, I think, first of all, just to baseline team, the research we're talking about, the state of sales mindsets, how do customers want to be sold in 2025 with Dr. Philip Squire and Eddie Guevara. So we'll have the link to that research, which is kind of an update to Selling Transformed, some of the research in Selling Transformed. I don't think there's any fault in terms of calling all of us lazy. So if we go back to, Daniel Kahneman's work and Thinking Fast and Slow and Evolution. As human beings, we evolved to try and take the path of least resistance and burn as little energy as possible. I think a lot of these things in terms of shortcuts or not doing the research, I do think it comes down to the environment you're in and the expectations of sales management and leadership and coaching. Because, this afternoon when I go to the gym, I'm not with my trainer. I'm going to have my coffee. I'm going to be jacked up. I'm going to do the best I can. There's no question, though, when I'm with my trainer on Friday, I will perform better because someone's watching me. I've gone through this so many times where I think, do I have to pay this person? Why am I paying this person? Why don't I? You perform better when there's a couple of sets of eyes watching. So this is where I think a conversation like this is so important for a sales leader. Is the sales leader ensuring that maybe we're working far less, but we're far better on the deals that we're working. And so that we put that time and attention and care because I think we'll all take the shortcuts if they're given to us, because we feel pretty overwhelmed, I think, at times as professional salespeople.
Yeah, that's so true.
So where does this take us? Let's keep going, if you don't mind, gang, just down this path of AI. So Philip, actually prior to that, maybe we'll just jump back to the research, the 2025 research. Was there anything else, that came out of the update of the research that surprised you? I wasn't surprised to see that the core sales values haven't changed. The ones that you originally identified, for the most, they are still the core sales values that are out in the marketplace. But what would be one or two of the insights when you went back to this that maybe surprised you a little bit?
Okay, so I think there are two things. One is that when we did the research 15 years ago, 80% of the respondents said that less than 10% of people sold to them in a way that they really wanted. This time round, the figure was 30%. So that's an improvement. So I feel,
yay,
great.
Something's working.
Something's working. So I felt that was a really positive message, because I must admit I'd always felt when we'd spoke about the 10% is there's a rather negative message to convey, and I was slightly concerned that our marketing team sort of talked about it too much, because it's much better to be positive than negative generally. So that was something that surfaced. The other thing that surfaced, I think we've touched upon already, is this nuance of authenticity to intellectual authenticity,
right,
which I think is pretty profound. And there's a third one. I'm just trying to remind myself.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
What it was. So this is there's a third nuance that came about. I'll have to come back to it, Mark. But
maybe I can help you, because there was one that really stood out to me, which was the notion of clients demanding greater transparency around data sources and reasoning. And I think that point leapt out and said, much like what we say to up and coming staff, or if you're using AI effectively, what you either notice the subtle changes that happen towards the tail end of 2024, something Mark and I have sometimes referred to as the November threshold or such. But if you look at the current AIs, and part of what gives me confidence that these will become much more helpful tools going forward, showing your homework is really crucial. Whether it's an employee who says, I've arrived at this conclusion, and you spend time coaching them to say, the most important things are explain how you understood the problem, what you considered as the solutions, and why you've chosen one solution as the result. That's more valuable than what's the solution that you have in hand. And I think that show your homework, in particular around how salespeople behave, how they provide and produce content, how the AIs work. One of my favorite parts of the modern AI is you see the little drop downs that start appearing that say show calculation, show logic, reasoning. And we open those up and you see, okay, this is how the model is going about determining how to take Mark's book and produce a summary for me, or search the web for these results, or reason through what this stack of numbers is really telling me about customer demand. Seeing the homework is so crucial. And I thought that kind of point you made around transparency of source and reasoning was a really crucial element as well.
It was. And I do you think, Mike, and I've thought about, I've remembered what the third point, I'll come back to that later, but what concerns do you have, Mike, about AI? Because I know we're talking about this in a sales context, but you must have some sort of
great question.
Major concerns about AI, as well as that you see the positives. And I think you've explained both. So, Mike, I'd be interested to hear your point of view on that.
Me too.
Yeah, sure. And since you opened the door earlier to being controversial, I'll follow you through that door and say the piece I think is most concerning. So I'll just declare my biases up front. I'm not a doomer. I don't think
Okay.
the world's going to end. I think employment will continue, and I think humanity has a future. There are many things that can derail us. AI is just one of those things. But I do think that the real biggest risk is that and continuing the theme we were on, we become intellectually lazy.
Right.
That we stop understanding why or what, and we really just concentrate on how fast we can produce outcome, throw it out there and let it go. And time management will become more crucial. Depth of reasoning and understanding, the social aspects that we're sharing here, pushing at ideas, but being equally willing to learn something new, to take and challenge base assumption based on the input that someone else has provided. And I think if we fall into the echo chamber of stupidity and let AI take over from us, then we're going to get the reward, quote unquote, that we deserve. But if you use AI as a tool to enable your improvement, great things can happen. And on the last podcast that we recorded, I brought forward the idea of, I think a real skill that everybody needs to develop is engaging, thinking, and challenging by using commute time or using 15 minutes when you're otherwise busy but not intellectually occupied to have a conversation about any topic you want with any AI that is handy, but forcing yourself to go through 3, 4, 5 layers down and throwing a curveball in, like saying, okay, that's great, we arrived at this point. Now tell me the exact opposite perspective on where we are and explain why that is what it is, or why you chose not to present that information to me thus far. And so using the tools not as an outcome creator, but as a thought process challenger, and then using the time that's available to improve on that. And I think if we don't fall into the trap, sometimes I'll call it the how trap. If we don't fall into the how trap where we just let the machine do faster and faster outcomes without focusing on the why and what, why am I doing this and what is the result I'm anticipating, then we're going to get our just rewards, whether that's from the staff around us, the people we work for, or the tools that we use. Bad things happen if you don't pay attention, but good things can happen if you use tools effectively, like a beautiful piece of furniture a craftsman made.
Wow. So we've got two sources of clickbait. People are lazy and humanity will continue. So if those two things don't actually drive some viewership of this podcast, I don't know what will. Guys, first of all, what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really think this is the kind of conversation that should be taking place in some capacity at most Q2 sales kickoffs globally right now. If you're a sales leader and you're not at least engaged in this conversation, you're probably going to fall behind a little bit. And I always pick up a nice tip, Philip, from chatting with Mike here, also yourself, but this idea of driving home and commuting and having a conversation with AI and then asking for the opposite point of view. Love that.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I just love that.
Yeah.
Guys, we could talk about this for hours. At some point in time, we'll do that in person over a pint, but we do need to wrap for today. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to both of you for joining today. Team number one, what you are going to be doing is picking up and reading cover to cover, Selling Transformed, Develop the Sales Values Which Deliver Competitive Advantage by Dr. Philip Squire. You're also going to see the link to the updated report we referenced today called The State of Sales Mindsets, How do Customers Want to Be Sold in 2025? Just a great summary and review. Philip, can you tell us a little bit about Consalia and a little bit about how clients or listeners today might learn more about you and what you're doing?
Well, of course, we have the website, which is www.consalia.com. We also have our own sales transformation podcast series, of which, Mark, you've been a guest as well.
I sure have. What a pleasure.
on that, but we're very easy to find. The website is probably a good starting point, and of course, welcome anyone wanting to reach out with me on LinkedIn and contacting me via that platform as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philip. And again, team, links will be in the meeting notes from today. Mike, how do people connect with you and learn more about your work?
I think I'll just say the same thing. LinkedIn is the best place. That's where I'm existing from a professional standpoint, and I'm happy to connect in any topic, any way with anyone interested in the space that I have thoughts around. And Philip, I'll just say a real pleasure spending time with you now and researching your work leading in, and keep being a unicorn, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. It's been great having you on the conversation here as well. So
sure has.
Yeah, been brilliant. Thank you.
Guys,
Mark.
thank you both for joining today. And team, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, because when you do that, that actually enables us to get amazing guests like Dr. Philip Squire and Mike Sparling. If you think there's ways we can improve this podcast, we're all ears. So you can send your feedback, and we love constructive criticism. Send it to me, Mark Cox, at inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email. And anytime somebody gives us an idea or a thought, I respond personally to each and every suggestion we get. And by the way we run the podcast these days came from great suggestions for you. So thank you for doing that. We'll look forward to seeing everybody next time on the Selling Well podcast.